Welcome back to Strictly Competitive EDH. My name is not Edgar. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Anthony and I'm the owner of Strictly Competitive EDH. I run the YouTube channel and the Discord server alongside Edgar. For this week, Edgar's out of town on vacation, so I'm going to go ahead and step in for him. But before we jump into the action, I would like to thank everybody for your continuous support that you have shown us over these last 6 months. The love and support the community has shown us is absolutely amazing, and we cannot be more grateful. I would like to remind everybody that our Patreon page is now up and running. So if you want to show more support on Patreon, the link is in the description down below. But remember, there are plenty of other ways to show your support for free, and all you have to do is give us a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Now, for this week, we have an exciting game for you with an even more exciting ending. So make sure you stick around and watch. Let's go ahead and jump into the gameplay.
First up is me, playing Rograk Thrasios. This mostly Simic list focuses heavily on Gaia's Cradle, but can also generate a ton of value through Earthcraft and cards like Chatterstorm and Wild Growth. We are looking to close out the game by generating infinite mana, to then go through an Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze combo to mill our opponents out, or cast a ginormous Finale of Devastation and close it out through combat damage. Next up is Lane, playing Sephiroth the Savior, or Atraxa Grand Unifier. This food chain deck is looking to gain value through its commander. They want to explode with mana early in the game, and cast their commander as soon as possible to assemble the food chain combo. They are looking to close out the game with a Protected Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation or Tainted Pact combo. Up next we have Anthony, playing Tymna Kraum, better known as Blue Farm. This Sans Green list accrues a ton of value through one of its many engines. This particular list is looking to go fast with cards like Birgi, God of Storytelling, Reign of Filth, and Necropotence. They are looking to close out the game with an Underworld Breach combo before their opponents have time to set up their engines. And finally we have Jose, playing Vivi. This new Final Fantasy commander does it all. Vivi wants to grow in power by casting non-creature spells, to then explode with a huge outburst of mana through its ability. They are looking to cast a Curiosity effect to draw through most of their decks and finish out the game with an Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze combo. The players are ready to go, and I get it started with a draw. I play a Verdant Catacombs as land for turn, and I crack it. And I go and fetch up a Tropical Island. I cast my commander, Rograk, Son of Rogon. I tap for a blue and cast a Mystic Remora, shipping the turn to Lane. Lane draws and plays a Watery Grave, taking 2 damage. He plays his own Mystic Remora, and I draw a card with my own fish. Anthony draws a card for turn and plays a Tundra, shipping the turn over to Jose. Jose draws and plays a Great Furnace as land for turn. He casts a Gamble. There are 2 Mystic Remora triggers, and Lane and I both draw a card. Jose goes gambling and fetches up a mystery card directly into his hand. He gives his hand a shuffle, and Anthony picks a random card from his hand. Jose discards a Snap and puts it into his graveyard. He ships the turn back over to me. I untap and pay for the Mystic Remora trigger on my upkeep, and draw a card for turn. I play a Talon Gates of Madara, and tap it to cast an Expedition map, triggering Lane's Mystic Remora, and he draws a card. I ship the turn back over to Lane. Lane does not pay for his Mystic Remora, and he draws a card for turn. He plays a Manic Confluence as land for turn. He casts a Dark Ritual, Mystic Remora triggers, and I draw a card. Dark Ritual resolves, and he gets 3 black mana. He casts an Arcane Signet, Mystic Remora triggers, and I draw a card. He uses the remaining mana to cast an Enduring Vitality, and ships the turn back over to Anthony. Anthony draws a card for turn. He plays a Volcanic Island, and ships the turn over to Jose. Jose plays a Seed of the Synod. He casts a Mana Vault, Mystic Remora triggers, and I draw a card. Jose taps the Mana Vault for 3 colorless and 1 blue, casting a Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora triggers, and I draw a card. Jose ships the turn, and I let the Mystic Remora go. I draw for turn, and I crack the Expedition map, paying 2 mana. I go and fetch up Gaia's Cradle, and play it as land for turn. I move to my end step and discard to hand size. I discard a Chain of Vapor and a Flusterstorm, passing the turn over to Lane. Lane draws a card for turn. He plays a Tundra. Lane pays 2 mana to cast a Grim Monolith, Rhystic Study triggers, and Lane pays for it with the Arcane Signet. Lane moves into combat and swings for 3 at Anthony. Anthony takes 3 and goes down to 37. Anthony draws a card for turn. He ships a turn over to Jose. Jose untaps and loses a life to the Mana Vault. He draws a card and plays a Cephalic Coliseum. He casts his commander, Vivi, and ships the turn back over to me. I draw a card for turn. I play a Windswept Heath and crack it, going down to 38. I shock in a Breeding Pool and go down to 36 life. I cast an Eternal Witness, Rhystic Study triggers, and Jose draws a card. I target the Mystic Remora and return it back to my hand. I cast the Mystic Remora and Jose draws a card from Rhystic Study. I ship the turn back over to Lane. Lane draws a card. He swings at Anthony for 3, and Anthony goes down to 34 life. Lane casts a Phyrexian Metamorph. Ristic Study triggers, and he pays for it with Enduring Vitality. Phyrexian Metamorph enters as a Vivi, and he ships a turn over to Anthony. Anthony draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He cracks it and fetches up an Underground Sea. Anthony casts a Ristic Study. Ristic and Mystic Remora trigger, and Jose and I both draw a card. Anthony ships a turn back over to Jose. Jose loses a life to his Mana Vault and draws a card for turn. He plays a Command Tower. He casts an Urabrask, and Anthony draws a card from Ristic Study. Jose ships a turn back over to me. I untap and pay for the Mystic Remora on my upkeep, and draw a card for turn. I play a Misty Rainforest and crack it, going down to 35, and fetch up a Volcanic Island. I cast my commander, Thrasios, Trident Hero. Ristic Study trigger, and Anthony and Jose each draw a card. I pay 4 mana to cast a Sowing Microspawn. Ristic trigger again, and Anthony and Jose each draw a card. I go and fetch up a Shifting Woodland and put it directly onto the battlefield. I ship the turn, and Lane draws a card. He moves into combat and swings at Anthony for 3 damage. Anthony takes 3 and goes down to 30 life. Lane casts Calling the Weak, sacrificing the Enduring Vitality. There are a ton of triggers that go on the stack. Everybody gets to draw a card, and Vivi triggers as well. Everybody takes 1 damage, and Vivi gets a 1/1 counter. Enduring Vitality comes back as an enchantment with its death trigger, and Lane makes 4 black mana with Calling the Weak. Lane pays 7 mana to cast his commander, Sephiroth the Savior. Ristic Studies trigger, and Jose and Anthony each draw a card. Lane reveals the top 10 cards of his library and grabs a card of each type. Lane puts these cards directly into his hand. He casts a Carpet of Flowers. Draw triggers go on the stack, and everybody draws a card. Vivi pings everybody for 1 and gets a 1/1 counter as well. Lane casts Lothal, Corrupt Sheriff, and pays for the Ristic Studies with Vivi's ability. He ships the turn back over to Anthony. Anthony draws a card and plays a Marsh Flats as land for turn. He cracks it and fetches up a Scrubland. Anthony casts a Silence. Mystic Remora and Ristic Study trigger, and Jose and I each draw a card. Anthony says he's not going for a win and simply wants to resolve a Smothering Tithe. The Silence resolves, and he casts a Dark Ritual. Ristic, Mystic, and Lothal trigger, and everybody does their thing. Anthony casts a Smothering Tithe. Mystic and Ristic Study trigger, and we draw a card. Anthony ships a turn back over to Jose. Jose untaps and loses a life to Mana Vault. He draws, and Anthony makes a treasure through Smothering Tithe. Jose casts a Sticker Goblin. Ristic Study triggers, and Anthony draws a card. Sticker Goblin makes Jose 6 red mana. He uses 1 mana to cast a Strike It Rich. Vivi triggers, Urbass triggers, Mystic Remora, Lothal, and Ristic Study. Everybody gets to do their thing, and Vivi pings everybody for 1 damage, gaining a 1/1 counter. Jose casts a Tandem Lookout. Ristic Study triggers, and Lane responds with the Into the Floodmaw, targeting the Vivi. Jose responds with the Red Elemental Blast, targeting the Into the Floodmaw. Every time a non-creature spell is cast, a ton of triggers go on the stack, so I will try to cover everything that is being cast and everything that's being targeted as best as I can. Jose casts a Blazing Shoal. Triggers go on the stack, and Anthony responds to everything with an Orcish Bowmasters. I respond to the ETB with a Deflecting Swat, and point it back to the Orcish Bowmasters. OBM dies, and we go back to the Mystic Remora and Ristic Study draws. I respond with a Noxious Revival, targeting the Deflecting Swat to put it at the top of my library. Noxious Revival resolves, and I draw the Deflecting Swat with my Mystic Remora trigger that was on the stack. Smothering Tithe triggers, and Anthony makes a treasure. We go back to the Vivi trigger, and it gets a 1/1 counter, pinging everybody for 1 damage. Jose goes through the interaction of casting non-creature spells to trigger Tandem Lookout and draw a ton of cards with Vivi. He's also pinging his opponents for a ton of damage and ramping up on mana with Vivi's ability. Anthony is also ramping up on a ton of treasures with Smothering Tithe. Jose casts a Displacer Kitten. Ristic Study triggers, and Anthony draws a card. Lane responds to the Displacer Kitten with a Pact of Negation. Draw triggers go on the stack, and everybody gets to draw their cards. Jose responds with a Flusterstorm. Mystic Remora and Ristic Study trigger, and Anthony and I each draw a card. Jose pings Anthony for 1 with Urabrask and attempts to resolve the Vivi trigger to add a 1/1 counter and ping everybody for 1. Anthony responds to the Vivi trigger with a Gifts Ungiven. There are some draw triggers, and Lane makes a treasure with Lothal. Jose responds with a Mock Salvage, targeting the Phyrexian Metamorph that's a copy of Vivi. Triggers go on the stack, and Jose pings everybody for 1 damage, Anthony for an additional with Urabrask, and he draws 6 cards with Tandem Lookout and Curiosity, and Anthony makes 6 additional treasure tokens. Still in response to the gifts, Jose casts a Desperate Ritual. Mystic and Ristic trigger, Urbask and Vivi trigger as well, pinging their opponents for 1 damage and Anthony for an additional 1. Jose draws 6 more cards and Anthony makes 6 more treasure tokens. Jose casts Force of Will, pitching Sink into Super, targeting the Gifts Ungiven. After the same round of triggers, Anthony responds with a Force of Negation, targeting the Force of Will. Jose and Anthony are going back and forth, attempting to stop each other and go on top of the other person to gain advantage and hopefully put an end to all this madness. After an insane back and forth from these players, Anthony casts the Forbidden Tutor and puts a Demonic Consultation on the stack. The consultation resolves and Anthony names Born Upon a Wind. He exiles the top 6 cards of his library and he goes digging. Anthony finds Born Upon a Wind and puts it directly into his hand. He casts Born Upon a Wind. Triggers go on the stack and everybody does their thing. Anthony can now play at instant speed and he starts dumping spells from his hand before he casts a Gamble. He fetches up a mystery card and puts it directly into his hand. Lane picks a card for him and he discards a Wheel of Fortune and puts it into his graveyard. Anthony casts the One Ring. Anthony talks to the table and says he wants to resolve this One Ring to live another turn. He wants to live through all the Vivi pings and the Urbask pings and wants to gain protection until his next turn. He shows us his exile pile and reveals how most of his win cons are out of the game. The One Ring resolves and Anthony gains protection from everything until his next turn. Once again, Anthony and Jose start slinging spells and they are going back and forth and trying to gain advantage over the other. Jose is drawing a ton of cards with Tandem Lookout and Curiosity, and Anthony is making a ton of treasures with Smothering Tithe and drawing a lot of cards with Mr. Gamora and Ristic Study. Anthony casts a Ranger Captain of Eos. The Ranger resolves and Anthony fetches up a Mockingbird directly from his library and puts it into his hand. Anthony cracks the Ranger Captain of Eos and prevents his opponents from casting any non-creature spells for the rest of the turn. Nobody has any responses and we are basically silenced until the end of the turn. Anthony casts a Mockingbird and pays 2 mana into X. The Mockingbird comes in as a copy of Eternal Witness. Eternal Witness ETB targets the Orcish Bowmasters. Orcish Bowmasters goes back to Anthony's hand and he casts the Orcish Bowmasters. Anthony casts a Demonic Tutor and holds priority casting a Flare of Duplication, making a copy of the Demonic Tutor. Both the Flare and the original Demonic Tutor resolve and he fetches up 2 mystery cards and puts it directly into his hand. Anthony casts a Mnemonic Betrayal. He takes control of everybody's graveyards and he gets to cast spells out of there. And with his 1 million treasures, it is definitely looking like game over. Anthony casts a Phyrexian Metamorph. The Metamorph enters as a copy of Eternal Witness. The Eternal Witness returns the Wheel of Fortune back to Anthony's hand. Anthony casts a Snap, targeting his Mockingbird. The Mockingbird gets bounced back to his hand and he untaps 2 lands. Anthony recasts the Mockingbird, paying 1 mana into X. Anthony makes a copy of the Orcish Bowmasters. With 2 OBMs on the battlefield and everybody at very low life, Anthony casts a Wheel of Fortune. 42 Orcish Bowmasters triggers go on the stack, and 21 Smothering Tithe triggers go on the stack as well. The table gets pinged to death with the OBM triggers, and Anthony wins the game.
What a crazy game and exciting ending. Jose really did showcase what Vivi was capable of if you allow the curiosity effects to resolve. But unfortunately, I was able to politic my way into getting that silence to resolve so I could cast the Smothering Tithe before going to Jose's turn. Because if that didn't resolve, there was no way I was catching up in the end. But again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in for another week, another episode. Thank you for your continuous support. And if you're interested in the decks used today, the link is going to be in the description down below. Thank you guys again. We'll see you next time.